Hi, my name is Kyle Dobson, and in our novel skill project, we will be discussing how to learn a new motor skill through the concept of art. Art is broken down into three parts: acquisition, retention, and transfer. This semester, we learned that the ability to change and adapt to learning is something that happens internally within our minds and cannot be directly measured. But learning can be indirectly measured by observation and change in performance, and therefore could potentially tell us something about our internal process and how it relates to practice and experience. This is where art comes into play.
Hi, I'm Teddy. So the topic of our novel skill project is flipping water bottles with various water amounts in attempts to land as close as possible to a target using the non-dominant hand. The most challenging aspects behind the skill will most likely be the use of the non-dominant hand and learning to accurately flip the bottle. This experiment will assess the learning differences between two groups using art. All three parts of art are required to fully assess the quality and extent of the learning.
Hey, this is Max, and I'm going to be defining the different stages in art. First, the acquisition stage measures a change in performance through practice trials in acquiring a new skill. Retention represents a change in learning after a period of rest, and transfer measures the influence of learning a new skill that is transferred to a different setting and different condition.
Finally, the purpose of this experiment is to use measurements of acquisition, retention, and transfer to assess the differences in learning from two different practice conditions.
Our experiment began with each subject performing a total of 15 acquisition trials, with each of their non-dominant hands. Subjects flipped their respective water bottles targeting a 2 cm dot located at the end of the stairway. The distance between the subject and the target was 168 inches, while the height was 84 inches. Two subjects flipped a bottle with the same amount of water, 150 milliliters, for the total of 15 acquisition trials. These two subjects represented the constant test group. One subject flipped three different water bottle types with varied amounts of water, 150, 250, and 350 milliliters. The materials used for our experiment included a ruler, shoelace, Sharpie, and masking tape, and of course our water bottles. We would use the shoelace to measure the closest part of the water bottle to our 2 cm target, which we placed on the masking tape. We would then use our shoelace and compare it to a ruler to measure the distance of the water bottle to the 2 cm target in inches. After measuring the distance in inches, we would record our data. After all acquisition trials were completed by both the varied and constant test group, both groups took a 7-day retention interval, and after the 7-day break, both varied and constant test groups came back and performed a one-trial retention test at 150 milliliters. Each subject would then perform a transfer test with a water bottle measured 400 milliliters. As we learned earlier, transfer measures the strength of learning the subject reaches to adapt to new situations during the acquisition practice. After recording all of our data, we then created two graphs, one for constant and one for varied.
According to graph 1, no progress is visible during the acquisition trials. The trend line in graph number 1 is flat, showing that performance is neither increasing or decreasing. However, when the subjects perform the transfer and retention tasks, learning can be observed. For retention in graph number 1, it can be seen that the subjects are improving due to the distance of the data point being closer to 0. In contrast, the transfer task showed that the subjects had a difficult time transferring the skill over to a different condition. As you can see in graph 2, the varied subject experienced a deterioration in performance during the acquisition trials due to the positive trend line. During the transfer task, the subject was able to show a stronger performance compared to retention in switching over to a different practice condition. According to the text, retention tests tell us about learning independently of temporary performance variables. They help us identify whether learning is occurring even when comparatively poor performance would seem to indicate otherwise. This can be seen in graph number 2, where the subject showed no improvement in performance during the acquisition trials, but the subject was able to transfer what he learned to a different practice condition.
Unlike the transfer task, retention refers to the persistence of original learning over a period of no practice. After the acquisition trials, there is a period where the subjects will need to rest before performing the retention task, and that period is called the retention interval. This allows for the performance variables being presented during the trial to dissipate. It is important that this interval is taken into account because performance variables can influence performance either negatively or positively. These effects are temporary and can hide the true effects of learning. For this reason, retention can be seen as a more accurate way to measure learning than acquisition. In comparison to Shea and Morgan's experiment, and subjects in both the blocked and random practice group showed improvements during the acquisition trials, except the random practice group improved at a slower rate. In graph number 1, the subjects showed no improvements in the controlled group and a decrease in performance during the varied group in graph number 2. This is a problem because there were some weaknesses that were presented during this exercise. The landing of the bottle presented an error where the bottle would roll after the landing, in contrast to an object such as a beanbag. Another weakness of this exercise would be the walls, which allowed for a limited space to throw the bottle. These are some of the errors that may have an impact on the recording on the data. Some strengths of this exercise may be the difference in water amount of each water bottle. This allowed for a different weight and can be used to measure transfer. In comparison to Shea and Morgan's experiment, some similarities may include the controlled and block group. In both practice groups, subjects had an advantage during the acquisition trials where demands on the memory were greatly reduced, while in the varied and random group, subjects had to worry about the change in condition of the practice.